Born into a prominent European royal lineage, Princess Stephanie seemed destined for an extraordinary life. However, fate led her to a royal predicament, marrying into a joyless union. Trapped in a loveless marriage, she endured a life marked by infidelity and illness, tragically resulting in infertility at a mere 22 years old. Then just 2 years later, a devastating event irrevocably altered her life's trajectory. Join us as we delve into the story of Princess Stephanie Clotilde, born on May 21, 1864, at the Palace of Laeken, nestled in the Brussels suburbs of Belgium. Her father was Prince Leopold, the heir apparent to the Belgian throne and son of King Leopold II, Belgium's inaugural ruler since its independence in 1831. A mere year and a half after her birth, her grandfather passed away, and her father ascended to become King Leopold II. To the world, he was esteemed as a formidable statesman who elevated Belgium's significance on the global stage despite its modest size. He embellished the nation with opulent palaces and imposing civic structures. He transformed the Congo into his personal fiefdom, governing it with an iron fist and exploiting its populace for personal gain. Under his dominion, millions of Congolese people were enslaved on rubber plantations, enduring horrific atrocities. Regrettably, these conditions, compounded by disease and famine, precipitated a sharp decline in the Congolese population. Thus, Stephanie's family's affluence was partially derived from Congolese blood money. Stephanie's mother was Maria Henriette of Austria, a member of the illustrious Habsburg royal family of Austria, a nation that had governed Belgium for much of the 18th century. She and Leopold had 4 offspring. Their first daughter, Louise, was born in 1858, followed by their only son, Leopold, in 1859. Nearly 5 years later, Stephanie arrived, and 8 years after that, they welcomed their youngest daughter, Clementine. Despite this large family, domestic harmony was absent from the Belgian royal household. Her parents' marriage had been purely a matter of political expediency, and they possessed vastly contrasting interests and personalities. Over time, tensions escalated, and Queen Marie Henriette increasingly withdrew from her husband, spending much of the 1870s living separately from him. This amplified the strict confines of royal existence, and in the ensuing years, Stephanie was poised to be plunged into a far more somber reality than she could have ever envisioned. Stephanie's formative years were marred by tragedy. In January 1869, her world crumbled when her brother, the heir to the throne, died, casting the royal family into deep mourning. Although only 4.5 years old, this tragic event profoundly impacted Stephanie and initiated the deterioration of her parents' marriage. Then in 1871, disaster struck once more. Europe was still grappling with waves of deadly diseases: typhus, smallpox, and the dreaded Blue Death, a moniker for cholera. Inevitably, an outbreak swept through Brussels. Stephanie, not yet 7, contracted typhus and became critically ill. For weeks, she teetered between life and death, unconscious, feverish, and in agony. Her family feared the worst, but against all odds, she pulled through. 3 years later, Stephanie's rigorous education commenced. She was instructed in a diverse range of subjects to an advanced level and became multilingual. Though not indulged, she and her sisters were taught by stern disciplinarians. From 1875 onwards, Stephanie frequently found herself as the most senior female royal present at court. Her elder sister Louise had married and departed Brussels, while her mother was often absent from the capital. Then in the winter of 1878, her destiny was sealed. Barely a teenager, she was presented to Crown Prince Rudolf of Austria, the sole son of Emperor Franz Joseph, and heir to the vast Austro-Hungarian Empire. Rudolf was 20, while Stephanie was a mere 14, but their meeting was far from chance. This was a carefully orchestrated match. Behind the scenes, negotiations were in full swing. The Austrians considered Stephanie a suitable bride, one capable of securing the imperial succession by producing male heirs. The pressure was immense, and following protracted discussions, the marriage was arranged. On May 10, 1881, just days before her 17th birthday, Stephanie and Rudolf were united in matrimony in a lavish ceremony in Vienna. However, beneath the dazzling spectacle of royalty, ominous clouds were already gathering over their union. Married life was far removed from a fairy tale for Stephanie. There was no profound love, no deep affection, only obligation. Initially, their relationship was amicable, even somewhat pleasant, but fissures soon appeared. Rudolf possessed a volatile temperament, and Stephanie found herself confined within the palace walls. constantly scrutinized with limited autonomy. Despite the marital strain, the union produced a daughter named Elizabeth Marie, born in September 1883. But instead of elation, Rudolf greeted the news with thinly veiled disappointment. He had yearned for a male heir for the empire. She would be their only child and Stephanie's sole offspring. By the mid-1880s, she was infertile, the cause being her own husband. Rudolf was not only an alcoholic but also a notorious philanderer, engaging in affairs with women across Vienna. He contracted numerous sexually transmitted infections, and most historians concur that he likely transmitted both syphilis and gonorrhea to Stephanie, rendering her unable to conceive at just 22. Initially, doctors attributed it to peritonitis. Rudolf had concealed his illness, and by the time Stephanie learned the truth, it was too late. Betrayed and humiliated, she was consumed by resentment. She refused to share a bed with her husband, who would stagger home at dawn, reeking of alcohol and other women. Meanwhile, Rudolf, drowning in his own despair, spiraled further into debauchery. By the late 1880s, it was common knowledge at court that Stephanie would never bear another child. Rudolf's infidelities continued unabated, and the worst was yet to come. Among Rudolf's numerous mistresses, one rose to particular prominence: Baroness Mary Vetsera. In 1888, at just 17 years old, she became involved with the 30-year-old crown prince. During this period, Rudolf's behavior grew increasingly erratic, possibly due to his worsening syphilis. He and Vetsera began spending much of their time at Mayerling, a secluded hunting lodge near Vienna that Rudolf had purchased and transformed into a private sanctuary away from the imperial court. Following Rudolf's demise, Stephanie hoped to return to her native Belgium, but there was a significant obstacle. Her daughter Elizabeth Marie remained a Habsburg princess, and the imperial court refused to permit her departure from Vienna. Stephanie, now the dowager crown princess, was marooned in a city where she felt unwelcome. Her in-laws ostracized her, viewing her presence as a painful reminder of the Mayerling tragedy. During this isolating period, she found solace in a romantic relationship with Count Arthur Potocki, a Polish nobleman who had supported her through her darkest days. But fate intervened cruelly once again. Potocki, still under 40, suffered from laryngeal cancer. A failed surgery rendered him unable to speak, and by March 1890 he was dead. Stephanie, still grieving Rudolf's violent end, was plunged into mourning once more. To escape her sorrows, she traveled extensively, drifting through the Mediterranean, visiting Malta, Tunisia, Sicily, Corfu, and beyond, seeking distraction, relief, or perhaps a fresh start. Still young and eligible to remarry, King Leopold II harbored ambitious plans. He desired Stephanie to marry the new heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Archduke Franz Ferdinand. But that union never materialized. Instead, by the late 1890s, Stephanie found love with Count Elemer Launier, a Hungarian aristocrat. This was not a political alliance, but a marriage based on affection. Elemer even converted to Roman Catholicism, hoping to secure King Leopold's approval. It was in vain. In a scathing letter, her father unequivocally refused to sanction the marriage, unwilling to permit his daughter to marry beneath her station. Despite this paternal opposition, Stephanie defied her father, and on March 22, 1900, she married Elemer at Miramar Castle near Trieste, relinquishing her imperial titles in the process. Throughout these years, ongoing family disputes were unfolding back in Belgium. Stephanie's father was aging, and without a surviving direct male heir, arrangements were made for his nephew, Prince Albert, to succeed as King Albert I. Leopold had long been enraged by his daughters for marrying beneath their rank and had essentially disowned them. His resentment ran so deep that he forbade Stephanie from attending her mother's funeral in 1902 and refused to see her before his own death. After Leopold's passing in 1909, his daughters anticipated inheriting a share of his vast fortune. Instead, they discovered a shocking revelation. He had bequeathed the majority of his wealth to Caroline Lacroix, his much younger mistress, whom he had secretly married just 5 days before his death. Enraged, Stephanie and her sisters initiated a fierce legal battle that dragged on for 5 years. Just weeks later, Germany invaded Belgium, despite its neutrality, and Stephanie's homeland remained under German occupation for the ensuing 4 years. As Austria-Hungary was allied with Germany in the war, Stephanie found herself in an uncomfortable predicament, residing in the empire that was contributing to the occupation of her homeland. Moreover, she had become convinced that Emperor Franz Joseph had been in some way complicit in the assassination of his heir, Franz Ferdinand. Luckily, by then, she and Eleanor were far removed from Vienna. In 1906, they had settled at Rudolf's mansion in what is now Slovakia, one of the few regions untouched by the war. There, Stephanie dedicated herself to charitable endeavors, finding purpose in a world collapsing around her. When Emperor Franz Joseph died in 1916, Stephanie and Eleanor returned to Vienna for both his funeral and the coronation festivities of the new ruler. Just 2 months later, Eleanor was elevated to the rank of prince within the Hungarian aristocracy. But their worlds soon unraveled. In October 1918, Austria-Hungary lost the war and dissolved into separate nations. While most Habsburg royals were exiled, Stephanie and Eleanor were spared. They remained at Rudolf's mansion, though they continued to travel frequently and enjoyed a harmonious union. Stephanie and Eleanor lived a tranquil existence after the First World War. By then, she was also a grandmother, as her daughter had given birth to several children in the early 1900s. However, the relationship between Stephanie and her daughter became strained in the early 1920s, primarily due to Elizabeth Marie's personal life and her political leanings. She was a socialist and became known in Austria as the Red Archduchess. After a final falling out in 1924, Stephanie and her daughter Elizabeth Marie seemingly severed ties completely, never speaking again. During these years, Stephanie penned her memoirs, published in 1935 and in English in 1937, under the title I Was to Be Empress. However, it was not a comprehensive autobiography, as she barely mentioned the half-century that followed Rudolf's death. Instead, the book was structured into 4 parts, with the final section titled Tragedy at Mayerling. It was evident that her narrative, at least the one she chose to recount, concluded in 1889. Perhaps her publishers recognized that this was the version readers desired, or perhaps she simply preferred not to divulge the details of her private life beyond that fateful day. In September 1939, the Second World War erupted. Stephanie and her husband did not reside near the front lines, and the bordering countries were spared the worst of the fighting. Yet towards the war's end, the couple were troubled by Nazi plans to convert Rudolf's into a field hospital as the Soviet Red Army advanced into Central Europe. When the Russians arrived there in the late spring of 1945, Stephanie and Eleanor sought refuge at the Pannonhalma Archive. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching this video on Princess Stéphanie of Belgium. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of her life down below in the comments. And if you have any suggestions, also let me know in the comments below. I hope you guys found this interesting, and I hope you are subscribed and have notifications turned on to receive all my videos as soon as I upload them.